Hi everyone, it's Lorie Brown with Brown Law Office and yournurseattorney.com. And I'm excited to have you here today. We have a special guest, Corey Walker. Corey, welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. Corey's an attorney in Iowa who also works with nurses. And Corey, could you tell us a little bit about your practice and your specialty?
Sure. I've been practicing since 1997. Our law firm consists of my father, my wife, and four other attorneys. My practice and basically five of the attorneys, all we do is represent injured folks, which includes a whole lot of nurses, as nursing is one of the highest injury occupations.
Wow, yeah. And I represent a lot of nurses, and so we would love to share with nurses today about how nurses can protect themselves from workplace injuries, and if you do happen to have one, what are your rights under the law? So thank you for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So how did you get interested in working with injured people from workplace injuries?
Well, I began my work life doing construction for my grandfather, which was a very physically demanding job. He poured cement basements, so we were lifting 100-plus pound cement forms. So I had a few work injuries over the years myself. Also, my grandmother was a nurse and my grandfather was a doctor. And so I got to see firsthand how medical providers deal with patients and sometimes when they have work injuries, because my grandfather ran his own clinic and my grandmother worked for him. So I got to see that from various sides of work injuries, and I just kind of fell into a position where I really enjoy helping folks through sometimes one of the most difficult times in their lives.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that a large percentage of your practice is nurses because they're a large percentage of the workforce that gets injured. Do you have any statistics on that?
I do, actually. Nationwide, around 600,000 medical providers sustain work injuries each and every year. Most of those injuries actually happen to orderlies and CNAs. Little known fact, but CNAs are actually 3 times more likely to be injured than construction workers.
Wow.
Also, each and every year, approximately 5% of CNAs nationwide sustain work injuries.
Wow.
So they are all too common just from the nature of work. RNs and LPNs actually rank third and fourth in the work injuries as well, behind behind construction and other jobs. So nursing as a whole is the top injury occupation, unfortunately. We're dealing with a lot of people's direct patient care is usually when we see most of them, or there's, of course, falls and stuff as well.
When I was a nurse back in, oh my gosh, 1983, I suffered a needle stick that resulted in an injury and I didn't know I had any recourse. So
Yeah, I mean, just depending on the types of injuries, every state, just keep in mind, every state is very different when it comes to workers' compensation laws. In fact, no two states are the same. Here in Iowa, where I practice, we still have a pretty good workers' comp system, but in some states, like Texas, there basically almost is not a workers' comp system. But one of the basic things, anytime you do sustain a work injury, is you need to report it. Iowa, you have technically up to 90 days to report an injury when you knew or should have known of the condition, but most employers want you to report it immediately, and that is a good policy because it can really negatively impact your employment and your potential work injury case if you wait days or weeks to report a work injury. So you mentioned the needle stick, and hopefully you reported that right away.
yeah, but I didn't know I had any rights, so I just treated myself under my insurance. And I probably did because I was in California.
Yeah, there are some states there's just not much benefits available, but generally, if you sustain a work injury as a nurse, whether you're lifting a patient, whether you fall, whether you get a needle stick, your employer is responsible for your medical care. And if you miss time from work, it depends on the state, but in Iowa there's a 3-day waiting period. So if you miss more than 3 days from work because of the injury, you are to be paid temporary or healing period benefits during that time period.
Now, the work comp is a state by state specific law, but aren't there other laws that are more federal, like FMLA, that could help nurses, and the Americans with Disabilities Act and some of the others?
Sure. One of the common misconceptions we hear a lot is with regards to FMLA leave. Under state and federal law, employers can run your work comp time. So if you're off work for a work injury, they can run your FMLA time at the same time. Most people think they can't. Another thing is your job. Under the FMLA, your job's really only protected for that 12-week period of time if you qualify for the FMLA, and not everybody qualifies. There's certain employment requirements to even get to the FMLA. So some employers will extend that time, and I've dealt with lots of hospitals, and some of the local hospitals here will give people up to 6 months if they're off work before they lose their job. But keep in mind that the federal law says if you qualify for FMLA, it's 12 weeks, whether you have a work injury or whether you're off having a baby or another medical condition. That 12 weeks during that 1-year time period is technically all you get.
So when you come back, say you come back at 12 weeks and you're still not at full capacity, what do they have to do?
Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act does provide some protection in certain limited cases. It was broadened a few years ago, but it's not something that just applies to everybody. There are very specific requirements as to whether or not you qualify for the ADA. An example with Iowa and federal law would be under Iowa law, they do not have to bring you back to your position if you're not able to do it. So the employer does not have a duty necessarily to accommodate any kind of restrictions. And so if the employer has not accommodated, so say you have a work injury and you're off work for 12 weeks and they've never brought you back to work, then that means they haven't accommodated you. That makes it more difficult to successfully pursue an Americans with Disabilities Act. Whereas if the employer does accommodate you, say they do bring you back to a light duty position and you work for several months and all of a sudden they say, nope, we're not going to accommodate you anymore, that is a much stronger claim under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's a very complicated law, and it's very fact specific.
So if I am a nurse and I'm injured, can I lose my job if I'm injured at work?
Most of the time, the answer to that question is yes. Now, there can be some exceptions, like if you have a union. Of course, if you're represented by a union, you need to immediately contact your union rep and probably file a grievance if something bad happens to your job, like termination. But most states, the law is if you're not under a union contract, you're an employee at will. So subject to federal laws that, the FMLA and the ADA and some others, your job, you really have no protection for your job. You're an employee at will. If the employer decides they want to let you go, they can, and vice versa. If you decide you want to leave, you can.
So what advice do you have for nurses on how to protect themselves from problems at work?
Well, first of all, you should know a little bit about your rights. Employers have a whole department, usually called Human Resources, HR, that's devoted to protecting the employer's rights. So you as a nurse should at least have some basic information available to you. And here in Iowa, I have just written a new book. It's called the Iowa Nurse Employment Guide, Your A to Z Nursing Guide, that provides the basics of FMLA, ADA, OSHA, all those various laws. So to protect yourself as a nurse, you need to at least have a familiarity with some of those areas of law, so the Human Resources Department just doesn't, run you over or do something that they shouldn't.
I was concerned about that nurse in Texas who took care of the Ebola patient and got Ebola, Nina Pham, and that her only rights now are work comp, and you said in Texas is not very good either.
Yeah, there's a trade-off. About 100 years ago is when most of the states passed their workers' comp laws. And the trade-off was if the employer was negligent, it doesn't really matter. if the employee was negligent, it doesn't really matter. Work comp is generally a no-fault system. But, if you're hurt on the job, you're going to receive some benefits, but they're going to be limited. In most states, you can't get pain and suffering. You can't get loss of quality of life when you sustain a work injury. So you're limited to the workers' compensation system. And in some states, unfortunately, the workers' compensation system has basically been gutted and provides very little benefits to injured workers. And Texas is unfortunately one of those states that the system has really been reduced for injured folks.
Wow, that's sad. Another issue that comes up with nurses a lot is some nurses can't have a drink even if it's covered at the nurses' station because they say under OSHA that's a patient care area when it's the nurses' station. So consequently, nurses aren't drinking while they're working and getting dehydrated, especially working a 12-hour shift. It's rare to even be able to go to the bathroom and let alone get a break.
Yeah, I mean, most states provide that, at least in Iowa, and most states do, that if you need to use a restroom, your employer is supposed to allow it. Now, most states don't have like a specific law about getting a drink of water or, a break every 3 or 4 hours. So, yeah, unfortunately, sometimes nurses end up on their feet for 6, 10, 12 hours without even getting much of a lunch break or, a break to even get a drink of water. But, those are things that are very specific, and you just kind of have to deal with your situation. If there's a problem, I'd recommend you bring it up to your human resources department, and hopefully they can find a solution for you.
Okay, that's good. So, but nurses, just take care of yourself. If you need to take a break, take a break. You're more important because if you're not healthy, you can't take care of your patients. So take care of yourself. And if that means getting a drink or getting a little late in your work, you come first.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about if a nurse gets injured, the best advice you have is to write a report and tell your supervisor?
Yep.
Okay. So then say they're off work for a little bit of time and their injuries aren't improving. When do somebody seek an attorney, and is it going to lower their recovery? How does all that work?
Sure. Keep in mind, once again, the states are very different in how this works, but if you've sustained a serious injury that appears it's going to impact your employability, it's probably better to get an attorney sooner rather than later because there can be lots of potential mistakes. For example, I had a nurse one time who had a pretty serious back injury, ended up losing her job, couldn't go back to nursing. Well, she thought she was saving some money by settling the case on her own. Well, because she got Social Security disability and she didn't put the proper language in the settlement documents, it cost her about $60,000.
Wow.
Plus, if she had an attorney, she would have got more of a workers' compensation settlement too. So, if it's a relatively minor injury that you go back, everything's fine, you're back to work, making the same amount of money, probably don't need an attorney. But if it's something that you have to have surgery, you're off work for months, you're concerned about whether they're going to bring you back to your job, then you should at least consult an attorney and learn about your rights.
Yeah, and I know, Corey, if somebody went to you and they had a minor case, you would tell them up front, I don't think you need me. You can do this yourself.
Absolutely. And we offer an Iowa workers' compensation book, and it specifically has the details in there of which cases I think that folks can handle on their own.
Great.
In most states, that means what we call scheduled member injuries, so injuries to hands, arms, legs, feet, or eyes. There are what's called the second injury fund in some states, like Iowa has a second injury fund, and if you sustain a scheduled member injury, whether it's work-related or not, and then you sustain another scheduled member injury, and the second one has to be work-related, only the second one, then there's a special fund called the second injury fund. So if that's your case, you should very much consult with an attorney because, frankly, nobody knows about the second injury fund. Some states don't have it. Iowa does. And, frankly, a lot of attorneys don't even know about the second injury fund. So just something to keep in mind for folks that sustain multiple injuries to hands, arms, legs, feet, or eyes.
Okay. So if Iowa nurses are listening and they want your book, how would they get it?
Sure. My comprehensive Iowa nursing guide is available at iowanurseguide.com. If you want just the workers' compensation book, it's at iowaworkinjury.com. But the nursing book covers work comp, it covers employment law, unemployment law. It's about 155 pages, as I recall, that pretty much covers everything you need to know from a legal standpoint as an Iowa nurse. So it's iowanurseguide.com.
So if a nurse is injured in another state, how would they go about finding a good attorney that can help them and somebody who's familiar with nursing injuries?
Sure. Well, in today's world, pretty much the internet rules. There is an attorney review site called avvo.com, avvo.com. That's a good starting point, in my opinion, because clients post on their testimonials. Other attorneys can post things on avvo about the attorney's reputation. I would probably start there if someone was hurt in another state and they wanted a referral. I would probably start at avvo to give them a referral as well, unless I knew someone in the state. Like I do know some attorneys in Missouri and Illinois that handle workers' comp that I can give folks some names on. But generally, you need to do your research. You certainly just don't want to hire the first attorney you see or you see on TV or something, because those aren't always the best choice for you in your case.
Yeah. And what about, do they have to pay for a work comp attorney, or how does that work?
In most states, workers' comp is handled on a contingency fee, which means that the attorney is only paid if they make a recovery. Now, there are some attorneys that try to take a fee on benefits that they really shouldn't. So if you're currently receiving a workers' compensation weekly check and the attorney says he or she wants to start taking a percentage of that fee or of that check, run. Because unless they've earned it, they should not be taking a fee on it. So if you're just voluntarily being paid benefits and the attorney hasn't done anything to get it, the attorney should not be taking a fee. So we see cases every year where attorneys, either they don't handle much workers' comp or they just, for whatever reason, take a fee that they shouldn't. So be real careful about what the attorney actually is going to take a fee on.
And do your homework. Do your homework in terms of finding an attorney, and don't just trust the internet, although it's a place to start. If you know an attorney who refers to a workman's comp attorney, then ask. People know in the legal community know each other, just like in the medical community, they know what specialists to refer to. So if you've got a work comp matter, go to somebody who can refer you to the right work comp attorney.
Yeah, I would echo that. You bet. Also, I definitely look and see if they've taken the time and effort to put together a workers' compensation book themselves. Because if they have, that's good evidence that they want to educate the public as opposed to just being maybe concerned about their own interests.
Yeah. Yeah. Books are, if you, like yours are free, right? Your books?
Yep, absolutely. Right. We offer our books at no cost to folks injured here in Iowa. You bet.
Yeah, because your goal is to educate the public, and if somebody happens to need your services, great. But
that's right.
Very ethical.
Yeah, we send out over 1,000 of our books per year.
Wow.
And a relatively small percentage of folks actually qualify for our services, and of those we only take some too. So we take a limited amount of cases, but we hope that thousands of people each year are educated and are smarter and not making costly mistakes because of the information we've given to them at no cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same way. I really want to teach nurses how to protect their license so that they don't have a problem, and if they do, ways that they can resolve it.
Yep.
So wonderful. So how do you relate, like, some of the more nebulous injuries? Like, nurses are exposed to stuff all the time. How do you know if they got it from actual work or from the general community?
Sure, that's an excellent question. Obviously, back injuries are very common with nurses, mostly from direct patient care, whether they're using a Hoyer lift or something. A patient falls, they try to catch them. Shoulders are also very common. So most of the time we're going to see a traumatic event where there's a specific event that started the problems. Not always. Sometimes it just comes on over time, over the course of a shift. Maybe you're lifting 10, 20, 30 patients a shift, transferring patients, and it just comes on. If it comes on, you need to report it. Gets back to the reporting thing, because if you go home over the weekend with a sore back and then come Monday say, oh yeah, I hurt my back, that throws red flags for the employer. Yeah. Well, what were you doing? Were you water skiing this weekend? Were you, did you fall? What happened? So, if at the end of your shift you're having pain and problems and it's significant, you should report it. Mm-hmm. Because cumulative traumas in most states are very similar to a traumatic event. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It can be over a period of days, weeks, or even months. So that's what we call a cumulative trauma, when it's not something that just happens in an instant.
Yeah, and nurses are walking on those hard floors. Gosh, I haven't had a pedometer when I was a nurse, but walking miles a day taking care of patients, and that's certainly a lot of wear and tear on the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Stairs. I mean, there's a lot of physically demanding aspects of a nursing job. Absolutely.
Yes. So again, protect yourself first, prevent a problem rather than have a problem. And if you do, go ahead and report it, because you do have certain rights, and again, each state is specific. So if you'd like Corey's book, Corey, what are the sites again?
For the nurse guide, it's iowanurseguide.com. And for just the work injury book, it's iowaworkinjury.com.
And remember, that state specific to Iowa, but there may be an attorney in your state that offers books as well to help you. But some of Corey's books do have the federal laws in it as well. So we just want you to stay well and be healthy, and thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And thank you, Corey, so much for being on the show.
You bet. Thanks for having me. And if you have further questions, feel free to give me a call.
Great. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.